Hi, everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Rebecca Tolin, a mind body coach and the creator of Be Your Own Medicine. And here we talk about how to recover from chronic symptoms like long COVID, CFS, headaches, anxiety, insomnia, and so many others. Well, if you wanted to hear from a mind body physician who specializes in long COVID, today, I have the joy of speaking with Dr. Becca Kennedy. She's worked as a family medicine physician for more than 20 years. Recently, she led the long COVID clinic at Kaiser Permanente in the Pacific Northwest before opening her own private practice called Resilience Healthcare. Dr. Kennedy, it's so great to see you.
Yeah, great. You too. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to me today. So, I want to start out by asking you, after so many years working in mainstream medicine and for a big healthcare institution, why did you pivot into mind body medicine with this model that Howard Schubiner calls mind body syndrome and John Sarno originally called TMS?
Yeah, I had been working in primary care for probably 10 years. And at that point, I had had enough experience with seeing so many patients that we couldn't help. I mean, in primary care, we see them all. And just day in and day out of the frustrations from my side of not being able to understand why patients were having these symptoms or how to get them better. And it just became this huge curiosity for me, and even just sort of like an itch I couldn't scratch, that a lot of patients have this pattern that we would see as primary care physicians, where there's lots of different symptoms in the body that are often related in the same person: migraines, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic pain. And so there's all these physical symptoms that there's no test that shows that it's positive. We can't help it very well. It's this chronic ongoing condition. But yet, often in this pattern, the same patients have a history of trauma, or capital T or little t, or a history of lots of stressors. And they also often have mental health issues like anxiety or depression. And so this sort of triad was very, very clear after 10 years in primary care, but it didn't help most of the time to send someone to mental health. And so I was like, what are we missing? There is something we're missing here. And it's these sort of chronic conditions that are really hard as from a physician standpoint as well. And it's frankly a lot of what burns physicians out. And so I actually left primary care and moved to urgent care. And when I did that, I thought about, gosh, if we could just focus on these sort of things and have that sort of separated out from just seeing in primary care and have a better focus on it, that could help everybody. And so I just searched and searched and searched for years to find better answers. And I did lots of studying and lots of CME and all these different things. And then was fortunate enough to have a friend of mine from medical school introduce me to the ideas of Howard Schubiner. And then I connected with Dave Clark as well. And then learned about this and saw the benefit of it, and then just really dedicated myself to learning everything I could about it to bring it to my patients.
I so appreciate and admire you and doctors like you because I know that this is not easy to find. And, um, it's
Yeah,
really important that we have physicians that are practicing in this way. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
And
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could spell out some of the kinds of symptoms and diagnoses that you're treating successfully with this mind body model as you were kind of differentiating. Yes, there's these acute conditions that people absolutely need emergency care for, but there's all these other chronic conditions that don't have an underlying pathology or structural cause that can respond to this mind body work. So, can you share some of the common ones that you successfully have been treating?
Yeah, and because I was working at Kaiser Permanente Northwest doing this, and I was the only person doing this in this large health system, I got to the point where I was referred, hundreds and hundreds of different patients of this huge range of symptoms. And so it actually was really fantastic to have such a big breadth and really so many things. And migraines, headaches, trigeminal neuralgia, occipital neuralgia, like lots and lots of different
Mm.
head pain symptoms, tinnitus, ear pain, eye pain, um, tongue pain, difficulty swallowing, um, and symptoms in the chest pain, shortness of breath, certainly irritable bowel syndrome, lots of GI dysfunction, pelvic pain, low back pain, but also a lot of different symptoms like um, just dizziness or also itching. I had a couple of patients that just had this chronic itching for years. That was MBS that I helped with. And then certainly things like chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, POTS, but also other patients with anxiety and depression and PTSD that had therapy for 40 years and tried lots and lots of different things. And it was really a pleasure to see patients like that get better as well.
Oh, I'm sure. And I think that's one reason it can at first be so confusing to patients because mind body syndrome or neuroplastic symptoms can present in so many different ways because the brain
Right.
and nervous system can create any kind of sensation in the body. So, in a nutshell, can you explain what's actually happening with neuroplastic symptoms or, TMS?
Yeah, I mean, the way I explain it is I even start with 95% of our brain is unconscious and automatic. And I didn't know that before, I learned about this, and that's really dramatic. Only 5% of our brain is conscious awareness. That's a tiny little p. And otherwise, we just have this huge machine that is the part that tells our body what to do. And it stores and remembers everything that happened, especially the stressors and the things that were dangerous. And it uses that information to apply it to the current moment of whether we're in danger or if we're safe. Because our brain has a bias towards danger. All it wants to do really is keep us alive on this planet. And so it develops this automatic system that is um, reflexively responding to all the information that's coming in, whether it means danger or if we're safe. And when it means danger, it then has to send the signals to the conscious brain that decides our behavior in order to um, make a motion or do something to keep us safe because of that danger. And so the danger part of the brain, or the where the danger part of the brain is located is in the unconscious part of the brain, and that's where it decides if we're in danger, and then it has to communicate to the conscious part of the brain, and the symptoms in our body is that communication system. And so the symptoms can be happening because the brain has decided we're in danger when we're really not. And our brain can get stuck in the on mode, be hyper vigilant, where it's viewing all the information coming in at it from the world as if we're in danger, and therefore sending these signals in our body. And it can not only cause signals like pain or dizziness or ringing in the ears, but it also is telling the body how to function. And I think sometimes that piece of it can be quite confusing, is that there can be changes you can actually see in your body, like your intestines moving or digesting in a certain way, or bloating or swelling or redness or a rash. But the root of it is because of the signaling from the brain that's sending danger signals, because it's interpreting the information coming in at it as if we're in danger.
Yeah, I just love how you explain it and you really crystallize it's a matter of a perception of danger in the subconscious brain that triggers the autonomic nervous system and therefore these symptoms. And the perception of danger can be physical, mental, emotional, or all of the above, right? So even if something emotionally upsetting happens, it still activates that danger signal in the brain and then the nervous system.
Exactly. We only have one danger detection system, and that danger detection system was designed for a physical threat of harm, like a saber-toothed tiger jumping on us or a broken arm, something physical. But our thoughts also turn on the one danger detection system we have, and we can't ever get rid of our thoughts. And it's not only our conscious thoughts, it's our unconscious brain has thoughts as well. And so really recognizing that those conscious and unconscious thoughts are what's also turning on the danger detection system and how that all works together.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction because so often people say, but I wasn't worried about this thing, but it's consciously we weren't, but subconsciously we were. And let's go ahead and just turn to long COVID right now because I know you've worked and continue to work so closely with that. And we certainly can see the intense amount of fear that was going on in the world during the pandemic. But even for people that developed long COVID symptoms later or a time where they didn't feel intense trauma, um, can you describe what you think is causing long COVID? There's a lot of theories out there. And yeah, just the process that's happening for people with long COVID. And let's also just clarify, of course, we can't give medical advice out here, but I'm really talking about people who don't have heart or lung damage or any kind of identifiable damage on lab tests.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And that's, I think, is such an important distinction to start with is that how I work with long COVID patients and what I think is going on for the majority of people with long COVID, which is not everybody, is when the lab tests are normal, and you definitely need to make sure that you've been assessed by a doctor and they've done tests, because sometimes there are things that we haven't discovered, like a thyroid problem or diabetes, or, there's something else going on to explain the symptoms, and we have to make sure that we have ruled all of that out. But it's not that difficult to do that. And really any doctor with the normal test that we have can do that. But it also is distinguishing between people who had a very severe COVID infection who did indeed develop some scarring or, something like that. But I think that that's a very small percentage of most, most of the patients with long COVID. That's not what's going on, but that would be different. But so for the rest of, many of the patients with long COVID, or at least in my experience, and I, being the lead of the long COVID clinic at Kaiser, I assessed hundreds of patients and worked specifically with loads of patients as well. In that, it really, if we stand back and really look at all of the pieces of data and put them together in a way that makes cohesive sense, it really makes sense that the problem is that it's the nervous system in the brain, again, getting stuck in the on position of hypervigilance and fear. And once it does that, it showers down lots and lots of warning signals into the body. And then those signals get stuck in place. The brain controls absolutely everything. It tells the heart how to beat. It tells digestion how to digest. It literally tells the muscles on the insides of the blood vessels if they should open up or close down, what our hormone levels should be. I mean, the brain is telling everything in the body what to do. So it makes sense that these, 200 plus symptoms are happening because of the brain, that they're brain generated. So if we look at it from that side of it, makes sense that there's not a reliable test, or a test throughout, many people in long COVID that they can find that is really explains the symptoms. Again, is that it's signaling from the brain and brain generated. The other piece of it is that I think we really need to remind ourselves how incredibly traumatic the pandemic was. I mean, there wasn't, like, if we were to make this up, we almost couldn't make something more traumatic. So you add to that then our total threat load that we have as a human being and the amount of stressors that we've been through previously in our life, from a child on, our brain is keeping track of all of that, and it's adding to it, and it's dialing up. And I always talk about how the danger part of our brain, it's like a dimmer switch on a light. It gets dialed up and dialed down. And when it's dialed up and it's up in the fear position, the danger mode on, then it's interpreting all the information from the world as well as up from the body as danger. And then it sends these signals into the body. Then, when the signals are in the body and we have these symptoms, and the sensations of those symptoms are going back up to the brain, if we fear those symptoms, which of course we would fear them, we don't know what's going on in our body. There's no one around that can explain. And then, there's all this mounting evidence that people around the world are experiencing this. And again, not knowing why it's happening or any end in sight, that's a huge amount of fear. So then even the symptoms can get caught in this symptom fear loop.
Yeah, that is so well explained. I think of like all these stressors adding up like this glass of water, right? And eventually it gets to the point where it spills over. And sometimes it's a pandemic, other times it just seems like, oh, there was just some little stressors in my life. But it's sort of the subconscious mind can get to that point of overwhelm where then being in that fight, fight, freeze response alone creates a lot of symptoms. And then, as you mentioned, we learn these neural pathways in our brain, and then what happens is people's emotional trauma and even just their fear and their humanity often gets left behind, right? And I saw this myself, 13 years with chronic fatigue syndrome, and doctors didn't ask what happened before you were this world traveling active woman and then you couldn't leave your house. Like they didn't ask what happened emotionally. And I saw that I was just treated like this body with labs, and that's so much what's happening to people with long COVID. They're medicalized in the system and not treated as a whole person. Now, I mean, the allopathic model is life-saving. We absolutely need it. But Dr. Kennedy, I love that you're bringing in the other dimensions of a person, which now neuroscience shows has an impact on the brain function.
Not only are patients medicalized by the medical system, but often worse than that is they're not believed, and they're made to feel crazy, and they're dismissed. And I think that piece of it is so hard.
It is. I mean, I remember feeling so invisible, and like I would walk in certain doctors' offices and they would almost like put their head down and shrug like I was a just a someone they would dread seeing because they didn't know what to do with me. But from the patient
Yeah,
perspective, that's really hard. And I
yeah.
wanted to talk a little bit about, and we'll maybe later get into the role of self-compassion too, and compassion for others. So I want to talk about some of these theories going around with long COVID, because often when people hear scary things, including medical theories, it's really a barrier to recovery and to embracing this model because they think, okay, that would work for me, except I have viral fragments or I have mitochondria damage. So I think it can be helpful to hear from a medical doctor like yourself, your views on this. Back when I had, was diagnosed with ME/CFS years ago, 15 more years ago, I was being told the same thing, like you may still have viral fragments or reactivated viruses like Epstein-Barr in your system. And now with long COVID, people are saying there's spike proteins, there could be these, reservoirs of virus hanging out, and I think that scares a lot of people. So how do you see that through a mind body lens with the population of long COVID patients that we're talking about?
Yeah, right. I mean, absolutely, that's so important. And it is really scary. And it is hard to reconcile kind of all this information about the studies that are being done about, these changes, these physical changes that they're noticing in the bodies of people with long COVID, and exactly how does that fit with the brain signaling sort of nervous system messaging part of it. Um, and a, a lot of the changes that they've found can be happening because of the brain signaling messaging. and what is happening in the nervous system. And really, how the nervous system works and how our bodies work is the signal gets sent down from the brain, but that's a chemical signal. It's a chemical messenger that then makes chemical changes and makes physical changes. And just like you smell some food and then your intestines gurgle, you just smelled something, nothing else changed, or maybe you even just thought about a delicious piece of pie, and then you notice some changes in your body. That is actual chemical signals happening and then actual changes happening in your body. But the reason it's happening is because of this signaling. So a lot of the changes, like cytokine changes, is something that we know happens in our body because of threat physiology and our nervous system being stuck in the on mode, fight or flight mode. Mitochondrial changes, inflammation, and that's been known for a long time, is that inflammation in the body gets created in order to heal damaged tissue. But when we are under chronic stress and our nervous system is stuck in fight or flight mode, inflammation happens, is that the brain signals inflammatory cells to get created in our body. And again, that inflammatory change, and you can even see swelling, is happening because of our nervous system and because of the changes. And so a lot of the different studies that have shown some of the changes can still be explained by the nervous system. And in terms of, the idea of reservoirs of long COVID or spike proteins, again, it's hard to say 100%, exactly what's going on. But one of the things that happens when our nervous system is not functioning in the calm, rest, and digest part of it is that our immune system doesn't work well. And our immune system goes haywire because our body doesn't want to expend energy towards a long-term immune system when it believes that it needs to keep us alive in this moment.
Yeah.
So immune system dysfunction can happen, inflammation, cytokine changes, all these different changes can be happening because of the signaling from the nervous system. But again, if we really stand back and look at the whole picture with the scientific method, and we look at a lot of these studies that have been showed, or like micro blood clots, not every patient with long COVID has that, even in this study. Like the majority in many of the studies, yeah, but not every patient. So then how do you explain it for those patients? And so some of the theories have been, well, maybe there's a lot of different reasons for long COVID. Not every patient is having the same reason. You know, Theoretically, I guess we could say that, but one of the things in medicine that we're taught and we often talk about is really finding a unifying diagnosis. What's the unifying diagnosis to explain all of these different things happening, instead of saying, oh, well, over here it's because of a thyroid problem, and over here it's because of, diabetes, and over here it's because of this other thing. That doesn't make sense, especially if the symptoms all start around the same time and the symptoms are connected. And then there's all these people around the world who don't know each other that all have a similar pattern of symptoms. And so really, and some people have the same symptoms because they got the vaccine. They didn't even have the COVID virus in the first place. So then how does the virus reservoir, fit in there? Some patients even had the same symptoms prior to the pandemic even happening, and then those same symptoms worsened. So when we step back and we look at all of these pieces, really, from my perspective as a family medicine physician, the unifying diagnosis and the thing that makes the most sense is that it's happening because of the brain signaling and the messages from the brain to the body. And then, the cherry on top is that then many, many, many people actually get better. And that's the important part,
Yes.
right? Like, it's really about getting people better and restoring their health. And many, many people get better when we attend to it from the perspective of the brain.
Absolutely. And I love that you're highlighting the perspective of the subconscious mind, because it's often overlooked that anything that scares a person consciously or subconsciously activates that danger alarm and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're looking at, oh no, I have mitochondrial damage, or I might have spike protein. That scares the brain and nervous system more on a subconscious level, and that keeps the stress symptom loop in place. What are kind of the key pillars or areas that you work with your patients with to recover from long COVID and all these other symptoms we've been talking about? POTS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I know that you've worked with that as well. Fibromyalgia, CFS, other types of pain.
Important parts, if we were to split it into different parts, is number one, understanding the science. And that's key, because if you don't understand the science, then it's really hard to apply because it's not intuitive. I mean, this isn't evolutionary that our brain understands this. Our brain understands symptoms in the body mean damage in the body, and there's something we need to do to protect ourselves so we don't do more damage. Our brains are evolutionarily hardwired to experience that, and then that's what we've spent our lives believing. I mean, and that's true if we have an acute injury. So it's not necessarily intuitive. So understanding the science and however you learn best, and if that's reading something or watching something or listening to something or whatever it is, but understanding the science. And then the second part is, I think, actually the hardest part. And the second part is accepting the diagnosis for yourself. The diagnosis that it's brain generated rather than due to structural damage in the body. And that is not easy. And again, the evolutionary hardwired, what we spent our whole lives operating under, and these symptoms in the body, all these rashes and swelling and things that you can see and feel, and they're so profound that you, with your conscious will, can't change. And so that it is not easy. And then all the messages out in the media and those studies that you talked about of finding these changes in the body. So that part is not easy, but it is key, because if you're still fearing that there's damage in your body and that's the generator of the symptoms, it is really hard to dial down the fear in your brain. So that piece is critical. And I think that as a physician working with patients, I think that's what I can really bring to the table for people to really help reassure them and really talk about and gather the evidence for them in particular of why this means this is brain generated signals rather than symptoms in their body. And then the third part is, so understand the science, understand how it affects you, accept the diagnosis for yourself. And then the third part is the tools. And the tools require work and time. It's not an overnight fix. It's not easy. Most of the tools are not intuitive, but putting the tools in place. And what I say to my patients is that it can be frustrating that, the symptoms are going to go up and down. So when the symptoms go up and you have more symptoms, it can be really frustrating or scary, but really just knowing that you're on the right path and know that there is a way out and you have that way. That's the important part. And the pieces that you need to know that you're on the right path do not include having all of your symptoms go away and restoring your health. You don't need to have that in order to just know you're on the right path. So again, gathering pieces of evidence, understanding the science, looking at people's stories that have gotten better. And I think that can be really key, is to really listen to and see story after story of other people who have gotten better, because it can seem really unbelievable or like you wouldn't be able to get better. And putting all of that information together, again, to know you're on the right path. And once you're convinced enough that you're on the right path, then it's about time, putting the pieces in, kind of gathering the different pieces that are going to work for you.
I still appreciate how you first emphasized the knowledge, the science, and applying this diagnosis to yourself, because I think that sometimes people do different techniques for the nervous system or brain retraining, but they still think that they're sick or they're broken, and they still may be chasing after supplements and diets and these things that aren't bad in themselves, but they may be sending this message to their subconscious brain: there's really something physically wrong with you. And so once you understand that knowledge, then those practices to calm or regulate the nervous system, right? And the neural processing therapy to be with the sensations in this mindful way goes so much farther.
Yeah. Right, right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And now a lot of people always wonder, okay, do I need to do the emotional work? So I'm curious what you find in your practice. We're talking about the knowledge, then there's different meditations and tools, and you I know in your work encourage people to find the ones that really work for you, that make you feel safe, maybe give you a sense of peace of mind. Um, the emotional work is seems to be important for some people more so than others. So how do you evaluate that with your patients, and what do you find is most effective to get to some of those emotions that they're being kind of locked in place by the subconscious, right? And they're under the surface of our awareness often.
Absolutely. I find that this is actually the biggest part of the work that I do with patients. And um, our suppressed emotions, the emotions that are stuffed down inside, I think is the hardest part of all of this to understand how that's connected. And when I first learned about this model and I learned about Dr. Schubiner and I learned kind of these different pieces, I totally put that on the back burner. I was like, wow, that's weird. I don't get how that's related. Well, I'm just going to put that over here and I'm going to focus on teaching people that their body is not broken, that it's the brain signal and meditation and breathing and expressive writing to get the thoughts and worries out. And the sort of, I call pain reprocessing therapy, neural reprocessing therapy, because I use it for every single symptom, itching, dizziness, anxiety, whatever it is. But putting into place that, rewiring the neural circuits and leaning into the discomfort through a lens of safety. And so that's, how I focused initially in the work that I did with patients. And now I've come 180 degrees. And I really have found that the stuffed down emotions and feeling and expressing our emotions are not only a key component for, say, the majority of patients, not everybody, no doubt, but I would say the majority of patients. But the beauty of it is it's not just about turning off the symptoms and even, restoring your health in your life to where it was, but it's really about so much more. It's actually about learning a new way to live your life that I find just incredibly beautiful and powerful, and really processing, these emotions that were developed because of our past, and then a new way to communicate with people that's really authentic and loving and stands up for yourself and allows emotions in and allows yourself to feel and release emotions in a safe way, and that it's really about going forward in your life in this sort of new glorious way. um, but again, I think that how the emotions fit in can feel like such a stumbling block for so many, it might, myself included.
Yeah, but that's really interesting to hear your kind of arc of realizing how much people kind of needed and benefited from working with the emotional world, but also just what they needed as a person, right? I know you and I both love self-compassion and bring it into our work. And one of the key questions of self-compassion, as taught by Kristen Neff, is what do I need right now? And really acknowledging the unmet emotional needs and other needs that just get pushed down.
And recognizing that I deserve to get my needs met right now. And I think that's such a key piece that so many people are missing. I mean, myself included, I do all this work on myself as well. And I think that's a huge one.
I deserve to get my needs met right now. And even when you say that, like I even notice a little bit of resistance in myself, right? And then we can
Yeah.
put that to when you're calling it neuro reprocessing therapy, some people may know it as somatic tracking and just kind of sit with those sensations. Something else I like that I've heard you say, I believe in one of your long COVID classes, Dr. Kennedy, is we deserve to feel our emotions too, right?
Yeah,
Deserve to feel.
right, right.
I mean, most of us are not raised with that understanding, which is why we hold them in. And again, it kind of builds up, and at some point, then they spill over the surface. We can all think of maybe if we've held in our anger and then it comes out in a very unflattering way that we wish it didn't. But that can also just be expressed in symptoms.
Yeah, right. No, absolutely. Right. And this is something that was so profound that I learned from Dr. Schubner and Dr. Lumley is yeah, all emotions were evolutionary to created to protect us. All emotions. No emotion is bad. They're all good. Some of them don't feel good, and we're taught that they're not good, or that maybe we're not a good person if we have that emotion, like anger. But they're all protective and they're all needed for us as a human being. And yeah, exactly. And we deserve to feel them all. And it doesn't mean that we have to hurt someone else, doesn't mean that we have to express anger to another person. We can express it by ourselves, alone, honor ourselves with it, release it. And then when we have the communication with that person, we can do it in a loving, kind way, but that also stands up for ourselves and doesn't waver in creating the boundaries that we need and maybe saying no if we need to say no.
That was so helpful for me too to learn about the evolutionary power of emotions. And especially as women, we're really taught not to feel anger and to think there's
Yeah,
something wrong with us for feeling it. But when you understand it's a message telling you to set a boundary or to get some protection, of course it's going to feel safer in your brain and nervous system when you act on that. Sometimes we may just need to be with the sensation of the emotion, but sometimes it is really cueing us to act. And I find that these symptoms can have messages about becoming more true to ourself.
yeah, right. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really what it's all about is the messages that our brain is trying to tell us. And is that message, is that message, you sprained your ankle, don't walk on your ankle, or you're going to cause more pain or more damage? Or is that message, you're not being treated fairly and you're not standing up for yourself and you don't deserve that? And is that the message? Or is the message, you're just out of balance. Things are going really well, but you're doing too much and you're not taking care of yourself? Or is it that I didn't sleep, I only slept 4 hours last night? I mean, it's really learning to interpret the message and what that message means, and then what we need to do because of it.
Absolutely. That's so well said. And what, we know that fear is the fuel for these symptoms. And one of the messages can really be standing up to fear to confront some of the behaviors that bring on symptoms. But we need to retrain our brain that we can do these things. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with patients on re-engaging with their life, even if these activities at first bring on symptoms?
Yeah. The main thing that I try to focus on and come back to over and over and over is putting joy and meaning into our life. I think we need to start with self compassion, which is not easy for many people, again, myself included. And so we really need to recognize that and work on that. Because if we don't have self compassion at the root of it all, it's really hard to do the other pieces.
Yes.
But then having joy and meaning and put that in first. And again, like how so much of this is not intuitive is, we're so used to, we have a physical injury in our body and we wait for that physical injury to get better before we then do something. We wait for our sprained ankle to heal before we then walk on it or run on it again. But what's not intuitive is we need to put the cart before the horse. We need to put in the joy and the meaning and the moving our body before our symptoms have gotten better. And then by doing that, that's what's going to send messages of safety to our brain that will then help our symptoms to go away eventually. But it's hard to do. I mean, it is hard not to sit in your house and focus on your symptoms because they're terrible and they make you suffer. And it's hard to go do things, especially when a lot of the pieces of joy that you might have gotten in the past, you're literally not able to do because of what's happening in your body. So, but it's still important. And if all we're doing is focusing on the suffering that we're having, or the tools to get better, or putting things in place, or the fear that we're not going to get better, if that's how we're spending our time, that is just feeding the fear in the brain. So, whatever small pieces of joy that you can get in are key. And whether that, and I think that one of my favorite things to do just through my day is that I think that you use this is just looking at and listening to the birds outside and connecting with nature. And even if that's just looking out your window, and like right now in Portland, we're having this terrible ice storm. So I haven't really left the house in 7 days. But even just looking out the window and maybe noticing the ice and the reflection on that ice, or in my house, just how comfortable it is to sit on my couch and, or talk to my kids, or call a friend, or watch a funny movie, or, whatever it is. And I think so many times, many people that have a lot of these chronic symptoms have a lot of personality traits, like they're perfectionist, have really high expectations of themselves, are people pleaser, all these things that I raise my hand to. And because of that, often the sort of litmus test of expectations we have for ourselves are so high that it's hard for us to get there. And so really dialing it back, again, having the self-compassion, understanding that life is hard. It's not that we're lazy, it's not that we're not trying hard enough. In fact, in some ways, we're actually doing too much. And this is our brain trying to say, whoa, you actually need to slow down and take care of yourself, and really focusing on those small pieces and really enjoying them, and taking the smallest pieces and starting to put them together. And you have to have a little faith too that you'll get there by doing that. And again, looking at success stories and others that have gotten better, and really listening to or watching success stories over and over and over, I think can really be important as well.
Absolutely. I so love that you brought up the part about, reaching for joy and peace, because it's really tempting to think, oh, I'll do that once I recover. But then it never happens. And I think the reason I had such a light bulb moment with this mind body knowledge was because I had already just said, okay, I give up on the medical system and beating my head against the wall. And I would just look at the leaves on the trees and read a little bit of poetry, even though I had a lot of brain fog. And so I think that's such an important point you make, because people often say, but I can't do the joyful things I used to do. And that it is important to bring compassion. There's a grief, there's loss. And
Yeah,
the nervous system doesn't really like big, extravagant, excited things, especially when it's dysregulated, right? It's very simple.
yeah,
It's very simple,
right.
coming back into touch with nature and ourself, or creativity.
Yeah, right.
And on this hopeful note, can you share a little bit about some of the recovery stories of people that you've worked with? Of course, you don't have to name them, but how people have fared with this approach, particularly with long COVID and other related fatigue conditions, both in terms of their physical recovery and also how they've reclaimed their life and maybe found some missing pieces in themselves through this whole mind body healing journey.
Yeah, for sure. And even just kind of starting out talking about this, is that my experience with talking to patients of saying that, I think this is what's going on. I mean, I have to admit, I was a little hesitant to do that initially, and I didn't know how people would take it. And I was a little scared to say that. But what I found and what kept me going is that for the majority of people, it actually really resonated with them. And the majority of people said, wow, this is actually the first thing that has actually made sense to me. And many people also say, this is what I felt is the problem. Like I felt there's something wrong with my brain, or the signaling of my brain, but I just didn't know how to describe that. And certainly I didn't know then how to get out of it or where to go. So the majority of people really were very accepting and open of the for the ideas, and then a much smaller proportion of people were still questioning, and it didn't really quite get there, but at least open to it. And then a tiny, tiny, tiny little fraction of people that actually were upset about the ideas. And I really got to the point where I just, people I spent an hour on the phone once with a woman that was just yelling at me the whole time. And I just continued with compassion for her the whole time and just said, I get it. I really do. I get it. And just, sort of being present with that because it is hard. And I think because people have been gaslighted and dismissed and said they're crazy and it's in their head, I get how it can seem maybe initially like this is what we're saying, but it's really not. It's really understanding the science of it. But with that being said, I mean, it just has been the most amazing part of my whole, 25-year career in medicine of actually, working with patients with any sort of neuroplastic symptom, but specifically long COVID because it's just so profound right now. And I have patients that were, not working for a year and a half on disability, or some of them that couldn't get disability, sadly enough. And I would always support everyone that I possibly could to get disability so they can get better and actually get back to work, because that's what everyone wants to do, really. But I have patients that, had dizziness and chest pain and shortness of breath and brain fog that really got it and get put the tools in place, and some of whom are back to work and made some life changes and realized they needed to make those life changes. And I have a patient who was very, very, very active and came was um, relatively young and healthy, and came to me, and she shares her story openly um, with me and everyone, but came to me with a four-wheeled walker, and you could barely make it to my office, and sat on the chair, and then halfway through the appointment even kind of um, fell down onto the floor, and then had difficulty getting up from the floor, and just really remarkable. And now she's riding her horse again,
Oh,
and she still has a ways to go.
yeah.
It's still not all there,
Yeah.
but doing great.
It's really encouraging to hear you talk about the patients, some of whom are fully recovered, but others who may still have sensations in their body, probably less, and they're living their life. They're riding their horses. They're going out and doing what they want and enjoying their lives again. And I imagine that's really enriching for you to kind of come full circle with what you've been searching for relentlessly in your over 2 decades of medicine, to really be able to help people in this truly holistic way.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really been remarkable.
So I want to end with, first of all, where people can find you, because I feel that you are an absolute treasure in this field, that you're a medical doctor, that you specialize in this type of mind body healing, and you see people both in Portland and around the world. So tell us a little bit about that. And then if there's just any final words you want to share for people who are wanting to embrace this, but need maybe a little more inspiration.
Yeah. So my business is called Resilience Healthcare. It's resilience-healthcare.com is my website. And I work as a coach outside of Oregon and Washington, where have my medical license. So I can see anybody in the world. in that capacity. I can see people who are in Oregon and Washington as a physician specifically. Um, and and I see people one-on-one, as well as I do have a virtual class that I teach that's 8 weeks. What I would say if people kind of just coming to this and, maybe not so sure, again, totally get it. You don't have to be there 100% initially. And I often say to people, as long as you've had the medical workup, so there's not something we're missing, and you've tried lots of other things, with the chronic symptoms, there's really nothing to lose by really going all in on this mind body technique. And if some magic pill gets created, you'll find out about it. Like you'll know, you're not going to miss out on that. And give it, a month or 2 months and really go all in with it. And again, in that time frame, I think there will be enough evidence to, even little pieces to know that you're on the right path. And that's the important part, is to really know that you're on the right path.
I love that. I say, all the side effects are positive. So just embracing this fully can give you so much in your life. Thank you again, Dr. Kennedy. It was so
Yeah.
lovely to talk with you.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
it's absolutely my pleasure. And I want you all to hear that people who have been really debilitated with chronic symptoms can find a way out. There are so many resources through Dr. Kennedy's website, through my website. I also lead a program called Be Your Own Medicine to help people recover. You can find that on my website, RebeccaTolin.com. I also post interviews with people who've recovered from long COVID. So if you like this channel, subscribe so you find out when they come out. Leave us a comment, and know that there is hope for your own well-being, and you can be your own medicine.